The starship Argent Vow was a cathedral of steel and silence. Every corridor hummed with restrained power. Every officer's step fell in unison, except mine. I'd been stationed there 6 months, the only human among a crew of Dravari, an alien species bred for discipline and war. They were statues in armor, faces unreadable, voices like controlled storms. And their commander, Captain Sareth Varen, was the most unreadable of all. Sareth was everything the rumors said. Flawless in bearing, lethal in battle, and utterly unapproachable. Her skin was deep azure, her hair a cascade of pale braids that caught the ship's light like woven frost. She never smiled, never faltered, and for the first month, never spoke to me directly. Orders came through intermediaries, brief and efficient. Human engineer, Deck 5. Human technician, repair conduit. She never used my name. I didn't mind at first. A human aboard a Dravari flagship was already an anomaly, a goodwill gesture after the war that nearly erased both our species. My job was to monitor the hybrid reactors, nothing glamorous, just technical enough to matter. But as the days turned to weeks, the silence between us became heavier than any gravity field. I'd catch glimpses of her during briefings, the way her gaze swept across the crew like a blade, cutting through hesitation. When it passed over me, I couldn't tell if she saw a soldier or a stain. Then came the mission to Virex Belt, a pirate cluster, scavengers armed with stolen Alliance tech. The Argent Vow moved like a predator through the dark, and when the first salvo hit, the ship's shields held. But one reactor conduit, my conduit, overloaded. The explosion shook half the vessel. I stayed behind to stabilize the core, hands shaking on the control levers, heat biting through my gloves. Seal the chamber, I yelled, but the autolock jammed. For a heartbeat, I thought that was it. Then she was there. Sareth, her armor black and luminous, eyes sharp as plasma arcs. Without a word, she crossed the barrier, grabbed the manual override, and forced it down beside me. Together we sealed the breach as alarms screamed. The radiation pulse scorched the deck, but we held. When it was over, she just stared at me. Expression unreadable, breathing steady. You risked yourself for this ship, she said finally. For your crew, I replied. Even if they're not human. She looked at me for a long moment, then simply turned and walked away. For the next 3 days, she didn't speak to me again. When I finally saw her in the command hall, she stood at the central console surrounded by her officers, discussing tactical formations. I was there to deliver a reactor report. I handed the data slate to the lieutenant, bowed slightly, and turned to leave. Then Saretha's voice stopped me. Engineer Vale, she said. My name for the first time. Every Dravari in the room froze. She walked toward me, each step measured, precise. You disobeyed evacuation protocol, she said evenly. You endangered yourself. I swallowed hard. Yes, Commander. Her eyes narrowed. Why? Because someone had to stay. The silence stretched until I thought I just doomed my career. Then, to my utter disbelief, her lips curved, barely, but unmistakably. Reckless, stupid, human. Her voice softened, almost amused, and effective. From that day on, everything changed. She began calling me for briefings, asking for my input, even sparring with me in the simulation chamber. The crew watched in uneasy confusion. A human engineer advising the commander was unheard of. But she didn't care. Or maybe she didn't explain herself to anyone. Weeks passed. We fought off 2 more ambushes, repaired what others would have abandoned, and, somehow, built trust. I caught her looking at me once during a debrief, that same unreadable expression, except now it carried a question I couldn't name. I didn't dare ask. Then came the incident in orbit of Lasara Prime. We'd intercepted a coded transmission, Dravari rebels, denouncing Saretha's command. The crew grew restless. Tension hung like frost in the corridors. She called a meeting in the war room, every officer assembled. I stood at the back, silent. Sareth entered, armor gleaming, eyes colder than vacuum. There are traitors among us, she said. And they believe this alliance with humanity has made us weak. Her gaze swept the room, landing on me last. They are wrong. She stepped closer, stopping only a breath away. The room held its breath. Her voice dropped, softer now, but every word was deliberate. This human stood where my own soldiers fled. He has earned not just my respect. She hesitated. Then something changed in her eyes, something no one expected. But my bond. There was a stunned silence. I blinked, trying to understand. Then she turned fully toward me and said, with that same steady, regal voice, "Husband." The room erupted, shouts, confusion, disbelief, but I barely heard it. My heart was pounding, and for the first time, Sareth actually smiled. "You were not aware?" she asked calmly, almost teasing. "Among the Dravari, to share battle and blood is to share union. You accepted without protest." I stammered. "Wait, what?" She tilted her head, gaze gleaming with quiet satisfaction. "Then allow me to educate you, husband." The silence that followed her words was the kind that hummed with power, like the moment before a storm breaks. Around us, her officers stood frozen in disbelief. No Dravari commander had ever bonded outside their kind, let alone to a human. Yet Sareth's expression didn't waver. Her voice cut through the tension like tempered glass. "Record the bond," she ordered. "Effective immediately." I opened my mouth to protest, but she was already turning away, issuing new tactical commands as if she hadn't just detonated my understanding of reality. The officers obeyed her, some with reluctant glares. The Dravari's loyalty was absolute, but it was rooted in hierarchy, not affection. And now their leader had just redefined what command meant. When the meeting finally broke, I caught up to her in the corridor. "Commander, Sareth, what the hell just happened?" She didn't slow her stride. "A formalization of what was already true." "What was already true?" I said, incredulous. "I thought I was following orders, not participating in a wedding ceremony." She stopped then, turning to face me. The lighting along the corridor haloed her braids in silver. "You stood with me when no one else did. Among my people, that act binds two souls. You fought beside me. You shared blood. The bond recognizes that." I ran a hand through my hair, half laughing, half terrified. "Sareth, humans don't." "I am not human," she said evenly. "And you are not Dravari. But you will learn what it means." She started walking again, her voice softer now. "Rest easy. It is not a claim of ownership. It is trust made eternal." For the next few days, the crew avoided me like a virus. Whispers followed wherever I went. The commander's human. The bonded outsider. Some nodded with respect. Others scowled openly. The ship's social systems had rules carved into stone, and I had become the crack running through them. Sareth didn't acknowledge the tension. She maintained her perfect composure, but the air between us had changed. I'd catch her glancing my way during drills, her expression unreadable but intent. Once, during a systems diagnostic, she approached silently and handed me a set of recalibration codes. "These will improve the plasma cycle efficiency," she said. "I thought you'd prefer to see them first." I frowned. "You're giving me command override access." "We share a bond," she replied. "It would be illogical to keep secrets." That night, I lay awake in my quarters, staring at the ceiling as the hum of the Argent Vow filled the silence. Bonded. Husband. Words that felt impossibly heavy, and yet the strangest part was how natural it had begun to feel. The next morning, the alarm klaxons shattered my thoughts. I sprinted to the command deck, where the crew was already at stations. Sareth stood in the center, gaze fixed on the holographic projection of an approaching fleet. "Rebel cruisers," she said. "They were waiting for us." I took my post at the reactor console. "They're targeting our sublight core," I said. "If they hit that, we'll lose propulsion." Sareth's tone was ice and steel. "We won't let them." The first volley struck. The Argent Vow shuddered as shield readouts flickered. Dravari gunners fired in perfect rhythm, precision honed by centuries of war. I routed auxiliary power to reinforce the shield matrix, but the enemy had superior numbers, 5 ships to 1. "Brace for impact," I shouted. Another blast rocked the deck, throwing sparks across the consoles. A hull breach alarm howled from the lower decks. Saratha's voice stayed calm. Seal Section 8. All non-essential crew to fallback stations. I turned to her, adrenaline hammering through me. If we divert power from weapons, we can stabilize the reactor field. And leave us defenseless? Better than dead. For the first time, she hesitated. Then she nodded once. Do it. We worked in unison, human instinct and Dravari precision intertwining like circuitry. When the final surge hit, the vow held. The rebels withdrew. Their ships crippled. Their arrogance shattered. The crew erupted in relief, but Sarath remained still, eyes locked on the fading enemy signatures. When the noise died down, she turned to me and said quietly, "You disobeyed direct protocol again." I blinked. "You told me to do it." "I did," she said, stepping closer. "Which means you convinced me. That is more dangerous than defiance." I laughed, exhausted. "You're welcome." Later, as damage control teams repaired the ship, she found me in the observation chamber overlooking the stars. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said softly, "My people believe that bonds forged in fire reveal truth. I thought I understood that truth already." I looked at her, surprised. "And now?" Her golden eyes met mine. "Now I am uncertain." I smiled faintly. "Welcome to being human." For a moment, something unspoken passed between us. Neither command nor duty, but something alive and fragile. She looked away first. "Rest well, husband," she said, and left before I could respond. When the doors closed, I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from knowing the line between us had disappeared, and neither of us wanted to redraw it. The Argent Vow drifted through the black between systems, its hull patched and scarred from the battle. The repairs were finished, but the silence on board felt heavier than the void outside. The crew moved with rigid precision, but conversations stopped when I entered a room. To them, I wasn't just a human anymore. I was an anomaly in the chain of command. Their commander's chosen bond. A living contradiction. Sarath didn't address the whispers. Her leadership remained absolute, her orders crisp. Yet whenever we passed in the corridors, her gaze lingered a heartbeat too long, her composure flickering like a candle in a storm. To me, that single glance meant more than any declaration. But to her crew, it was sacrilege. 3 days after the battle, the Council of Fleet Command summoned her to appear in person. "They will question your authority," said her second officer, a tall Dravari named Kane. "They will not accept this union." Saratha's reply was calm, almost cold. "They will accept what victory commands." She asked me to accompany her. "They requested my presence," I said cautiously. "They didn't request mine." "You are my husband," she said. "By Dravari law, that grants you the right to stand beside me." I hesitated. "And if they object?" "Then they object to me." The journey to the Council's flagship was tense. The ship's interior was carved from silver and obsidian, every wall etched with ancient battle oaths. The counselors awaited us in a vast chamber lined with banners that seemed to hum with history. When we entered, the air felt like a weapon drawn halfway from its sheath. "Commander Sarath Varin," intoned the eldest counselor, "you stand accused of compromising Dravari honor. You bound yourself to a human, an untested, emotional, illogical creature. Explain yourself." Saratha's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "Logic does not win wars. Discipline does not build trust. He saved my ship when my crew hesitated. His kind taught us survival. If that dishonors you, then you have forgotten why we fought to live." Her defiance hung in the air. The council murmured among themselves, unsettled. One of them turned to me. "Human, do you understand what she risks for you?" I met his gaze. "Probably everything, but she's not the only one taking that risk." That earned a ripple of silence. For the first time, I realized they weren't just measuring her, they were measuring us. After the session, we were confined to guest quarters pending deliberation. The walls gleamed like glass. The air smelled of metal and cold judgment. Sarath stood by the viewport, arms folded, her reflection fractured by starlight. "You spoke boldly," she said. "Perhaps too boldly." "You're welcome," I replied. She turned, one brow raised. "Humans mistake courage for recklessness. Dravari mistakes silence for wisdom," I countered. For a moment, she looked at me, really looked. Then her lips curved slightly. "Perhaps that is why we fit." Before I could reply, the alarm sounded. The lights shifted from silver to red. An explosion shuddered through the hull. Sareth moved instantly. "Rebel boarding craft," she said, voice clipped. They anticipated this meeting. We raced through the corridors as soldiers flooded the decks. The council's guards fought to contain the attackers, but it was chaos. Sareth's armor shimmered as it activated, its segmented plates locking into place. She handed me a sidearm. "Stay behind me." "Not a chance," I said, checking the charge. "We're bonded, remember?" The first wave hit like a storm. Rebels in scavenged armor poured through the blast doors. Sareth fought like lightning, her strikes precise, elegant, merciless. I covered her flank, shooting through smoke and flame. The air reeked of ozone and blood. At one point, she was thrown back against the wall, her weapon knocked from her grasp. I dove across the floor, firing blindly until the last rebel fell. I reached her just as she tried to stand. "You're hit," I shouted. She shook her head. "Minor." But her armor was cracked, blood dark against her skin. We made it to the command center, where the surviving counselors huddled behind broken consoles. "They've breached the reactor," Kane shouted through the comms. "We'll lose containment." Sareth pressed her hand to her wound, her voice steady despite the pain. "Evacuate the council. We'll stabilize the core." The corridors leading to the reactor were hell, fire, sparks, the sound of a dying ship groaning under its own weight. When we reached the chamber, I saw the truth. The core stabilizers were destroyed. "We can't contain it," I said. "We have to vent the energy manually." Sareth met my eyes. "Manual control requires two." Without hesitation, we took positions on opposite sides of the console, locking our hands on the levers. The heat was unbearable. Systems screamed warnings in a dozen languages. "On my mark," she shouted. 3, 2. The blast wave hit before she finished. The force threw me backward, pain exploding through my chest. When I opened my eyes, she was there, kneeling beside me, smoke curling around her. "The core is stable," she said quietly. "You did it." I tried to smile. "We did it." Her hand brushed my face, gentle despite the gauntlet. "You should not have followed me into this. You should know by now," I murmured, "that I'm bad at following orders." For a moment, her expression softened in a way I'd never seen before. Unmasked, unguarded. Then she leaned closer, her forehead resting against mine. "If we live through this," she whispered, "then the bond is real, not of law but of choice." I wanted to reply, but the light behind her flared. Rescue teams flooding the chamber. She stood, straightened her armor, and extended a hand. "Come, husband," she said. "Our enemies have learned that love is not our weakness. It is our weapon." I took her hand, and for the first time since I'd come aboard the Argent Vow, I realized she wasn't the one saving me. We were saving each other. The aftermath of the rebellion scarred more than the Council's flagship. It cracked the foundation of an empire. Word spread faster than light. An alien commander and her human bond had saved the Council itself. For a people built on hierarchy and bloodlines, it was unthinkable. For others, it was prophecy. Across the Dravari fleets, whispers rose about unity, about what humanity brought to the galaxy beyond chaos and war. The Argent Vow became a symbol overnight. Half the crew worshipped Sareth for her defiance. The other half feared what she represented. And me? I was no longer just the human engineer. To some, I was the living proof that Dravari were changing. To others, I was the infection causing it. In the medical bay, Sareth's wounds healed faster than expected. Dravari physiology was extraordinary, but I suspected her strength had less to do with biology and more with sheer stubbornness. When I visited, She was already back in uniform, reviewing tactical data. "You should be resting," I said. "I am," she replied without looking up. "Multitasking." I leaned against the doorway. "You nearly died saving people who wanted to strip your rank. Leadership is not obedience," she said simply. "It is conviction." She finally looked up at me, her gaze softer now. "And you keep saving me from myself. Hazard of being your husband, apparently." Her lips curved faintly. "You are adapting quickly." Peace, fragile and temporary, settled for a while. Together we oversaw the reconstruction of the council fleet. Every meeting, every debate was a test of tolerance. Humans and Dravari sharing command space was unheard of. Yet when Sareth spoke, they listened not because of her title but because of her presence. And when I spoke beside her, they saw something stranger still. Cooperation born not of treaty but of choice. It wasn't long before the cracks appeared again. The outer sectors, fractured remnants of the old rebellion, began amassing fleets. They refused to recognize the new alliance. Intelligence reports whispered the same name over and over. Admiral Karath, a warlord who had once served under Sareth's father. He believed purity was strength. "He sees you as corruption," I told her one night as we studied the data. "He will come for you personally." She nodded slowly. "Then he will learn what corruption can create." The Argent Vow was dispatched to intercept his fleet before it reached the trade worlds. We emerged from hyperspace into a field of fire. Karatha's armada eclipsed the stars, 30 ships, disciplined, fanatical. Sareth stood on the bridge, hands clasped behind her back. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "Form the line." The first exchange was brutal. Plasma arcs burned through space, shields flickered, debris scattered like meteors. The vow took hit after hit, yet Sareth refused retreat. "If we fall back, he wins," she said. "Hold the vector." I worked frantically at the reactor console, rerouting power, trying to keep the core from overheating. Through the haze of static and alarms, Karatha's voice cut through the comms. "Sareth Varin," he sneered. "The half-blood commander and her human pet. You disgrace us all." She didn't flinch. "You disgrace yourself, Karath. You fight for ghosts while I fight for the living. Then die with them," he hissed, and the transmission cut. His flagship advanced, a monstrosity of dark metal and fury. Sareth turned to me. "He will target the core. You must stay below and stabilize it." "And leave you alone up here?" I said. "Not happening." Her eyes softened. "You are not a soldier, husband." "Neither are you," I said quietly. "You're something better." The battle dragged on for hours. By the time I reached the reactor bay, the ship was bleeding energy. Sparks cascaded from ruptured conduits. I could hear the distant rumble of explosions above. Then her voice came through the comm, strained but unbroken. "They are boarding," she said. "Bridge security compromised. I'm coming up." "No," she ordered sharply. "That is an order." Static followed. I ignored it. I grabbed a plasma rifle and sprinted through smoke-filled corridors. The ship trembled, the deck tilting under my boots. When I reached the command deck, it was chaos. Flames, bodies, shattered glass. And in the center stood Sareth, locked in combat with Karath himself. He was massive, his armor etched with old sigils of conquest. Their blades clashed in a storm of light and sparks. I aimed my rifle, but the blast ricocheted harmlessly off his shield. Sareth staggered under his strike, blood streaking her cheek. He raised his blade for the killing blow, and I ran forward without thinking, slamming into him with everything I had. The impact sent us both sprawling. Karath roared, grabbing my throat. "You would die for her?" he spat. "Gladly," I choked. His blade glowed red. Then, in a blur, Sareth's sword cleaved through his chest. The light in his eyes flickered out as his body fell. She knelt beside me, tearing off her gauntlet and pressing her hand against my neck where the burn seared deep. "You fool," she whispered. "You beautiful fool." I coughed, half laughing. "I told you I'm bad at orders. "You are intolerable," she said, voice trembling. "And irreplaceable." The remaining enemy ships broke formation, leaderless. The Argent Vow stood battered but unbroken, her crew rallying behind the only commander who had ever bled for them. When the smoke cleared, the stars seemed closer, as if the universe itself had taken notice. Later, in the quiet after the victory, we stood on the observation deck. Her hand found mine without ceremony. "Karatha's death will change everything," she said. "For better or worse." I looked out at the stars. "Maybe that's the point." She turned to me, her expression unreadable in the reflected starlight. "Among my people, the bond is sacred," she said. "But what we have, it's more than bond or title." I met her gaze. "Then what is it?" She smiled faintly. "Proof that two hearts, however different, can still beat in time." The hum of the ship filled the silence again, steady and alive. I squeezed her hand. "Then let's make sure it keeps beating." And somewhere beyond the viewport, the void itself seemed to pulse in agreement. The victory over Karath didn't bring celebration. It brought silence, the kind that lingers after thunder, when the echoes fade and the air tastes of smoke and memory. The Argent Vow limped back to Alliance space, her hull torn and her decks littered with scars. Yet despite the damage, she glowed in the starlight, a survivor, like the people aboard her. Repairs took weeks. The crew worked side by side with human engineers from Earth Command, their wary cooperation slowly softening into respect. No one dared question Saratha's authority anymore. Her decisions had saved billions, and her defiance had rewritten history. The first Dravari human joint fleet would be born from her command. She'd made certain of it. As for me, I spent those weeks in the reactor bay, restoring systems and pretending the galaxy wasn't watching. But I could feel it, the change. Every transmission, every whisper, every salute I received now carried the same unspoken truth. The bond that had started as accident had become a symbol of something neither species had words for. Sarath visited less during that time, consumed by council meetings and rebuilding efforts. When she did appear, she'd stand in the doorway watching me work. No orders, no words, just that steady gaze that had once terrified me. Now it steadied me instead. On the day the vow was finally recommissioned, she called me to the observation deck. The stars hung close, the nebula beyond casting pale fire across the hull. She was in full regalia, armor polished, braids woven with silver thread, but her eyes held no command, only warmth. "The council has approved the treaty," she said. "The fleets will merge. Humanity and Dravari will share the stars." I nodded. "You made it happen." "We made it happen," she corrected. Then her tone shifted, quieter. "But I am leaving command." That caught me off guard. "What?" "The war is over," she said simply. "My people need peace, not soldiers. And She hesitated for the first time I'd ever seen. "I need to understand what it means to live beyond battle." I looked at her, half smiling, half afraid. "And me? You still owe me one more lesson," she said. The next weeks blurred into new life. We traveled not as commander and engineer, but as something stranger, partners of two worlds. We visited colonies that had once burned under the war, helped rebuild stations, spoke to humans and Dravari together. She was still a soldier at heart, disciplined, sharp, but laughter came easier now, softening the edges of her voice. I never thought I'd see her laugh. One evening, we landed on an unnamed moon. No cities, no politics, just ice plains glowing under two suns. We stood by the ship, wind tugging at our jackets. "You chose this place," she said. "Why?" I shrugged. "Because no one owns it yet. It's neutral. Like us." She looked out at the horizon. "My people used to believe the stars were gods," she said, "that they chose our fates. But I think we choose each other instead." She turned toward me, eyes reflecting the light of both suns. "Tell me, husband," she said softly, "do humans always love this stubbornly?" I grinned. "Only when it matters." We stayed on that moon for days, watching the twin suns rise and set in silence. Messages kept arriving, requests for guidance, for leadership, but we answered few of them. The galaxy was learning to govern itself. It didn't need us to tell it how. When the time finally came to leave, Sereth stood at the base of the Argent Vows ramp, looking back at the frozen plains. "You taught me something," she said. "That unity isn't born from power. It's born from choice." I took her hand. "And you taught me something too, that love doesn't have to make sense to matter." She smiled then, faint but real. "Then let that be our legacy." As the ship lifted into the sky, the ice below shimmered with reflected light. 2 contrails crossed above the horizon, one gold, one silver, merging into a single streak that vanished into the stars. The galaxy changed because of a war it couldn't forget and a bond it couldn't explain. Somewhere, stories began to spread, of an alien commander and her human husband who turned enemies into allies, who made peace not through treaties, but through faith in each other. And whenever I think of her now, of that first moment she called me husband, I remember the look in her eyes, not command, not conquest, just the quiet understanding that sometimes the universe stops fighting itself long enough to remember what it means to be alive.